Welcome, everyone. My name is Judy Stenmark. I'm the CEO of Consumer Healthcare Products Australia. We're really excited to have you all here today. We will be recording today's webinar and sharing this recording with you following the event. So today we're exploring the Edelman Trust Barometer, Trust and Health in Australia, which highlights how younger generations are changing who we trust in healthcare. And we've got a lot of reasons to look at this, especially some of the instances that have happened over the last few weeks in healthcare. With influence shifting from traditional institutions, this report offers key insights in rebuilding trust to improve health outcomes. So, before we dive in, I'd like to introduce our speakers today from Edelman, Tom Robinson, who is the CEO. Tom brings over 20 years of global experience in brand strategy, communications and commerce, and he champions innovation and media diversity in Australia and has contributed to industry bodies, awards, and academic programs. And Caroline Lovejoy is Head of Marketing Communications at Edelman Australia. And Caroline is a seasoned communications leader with 20 plus years of experience across earned media, influencer strategy, and brand activations. She's led major campaigns for brands like Lexus, Sony, and Unilever, and is known for building high-performing teams and delivering consumer-first work. So I hope everyone's ready, and I'm going to hand over to Tom. Off you go.
Thank you, Judy, and also thank you to the CHP team for the opportunity to join you all today. And first, and thank you for everyone dialing in as well, as we will look to share the findings of this year's special report on trust and health here in Australia. So, while our focus today is trust and health, it would also help for us to do kind of some scene setting on the macro state of trust here in Australia. And so while this is a special sector report we're going to predominantly look at, we also have an annual trust barometer, which looks at a more generalist perception of trust here in the market. And that's where we're going to start very briefly. So the Edelman Trust Barometer is actually now in its 25th year. It's the largest study of institutional trust in the world. And we look to the barometer each year to give us a sense of what business and communication leaders need to prioritise in the year ahead. Now, over the 2.5 decades that we've been studying trust, it's provided valuable insights into that evolving relationship between the institutions of business, government, media, and NGOs, and that of the public. So a lot's happened, and we do have a very quick video to recap some of the moments and movements as well that have shaped our society and led us to this moment today.
It's been a generation since the year 2000. The turn of a new century brought the rise of a globalized society, and with it, the need for a new trust compact. This generation could be defined by moments that changed the world.
To the party!
By influential people who shaped it. By technology that pushed boundaries. And movements that redefined society.
I am sorry.
For this entire generation, Edelman has been studying an intangible force that is vital to a strong social fabric.
Trust. 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 Trust.
Trust is the foundation on which institutions can build a belief in the future.
Until 2021, NGOs were the most trusted institution. In the wake of the COVID pandemic, business has emerged as the most trusted, seen as both competent and ethical. But with higher trust comes greater responsibility. The public sees government and media feeding the cycle of distrust. In this networked world, mis and disinformation run rampant, and individual experience eclipses expertise. There's a widening gap in trust between those with high versus low income. These divided realities intensify polarization and leave many feeling the system is not fair. Amidst these challenges to trust, our social fabric is unraveling. Yet, we have also found that trust is local. Teachers, doctors, and neighbours are highly trusted. Local trust has the power to radiate outward. The world may have never been more divided.
We need to restore trust in order to bridge the divides in society.
So some further context here. So we first started studying trust back in 1999 in the wake of the Battle of Seattle, as it was known. And that was when anti-globalization protests at the World Trade Organization summit erupted into violence. And it very much put the question of who we trust to do what's right firmly on the agenda for the leaders of business, government, media, and NGOs. Now, shortly after that swell of nationalism, we were celebrating a moment of global unity here in Australia as the Olympics rolled into town, and it felt like we were ushering in a new millennium and a period of hope. Now, since then, trust has waxed and waned through global and local upheavals. The Iraq War permanently damaged trust in Western governments. The GFC sent trust in our financial institutions into freefall, which also gave rise to a new wave of populism and a greater belief in self-determination. Now, while our economy prospered relative to others, we did deal with moments that challenged our history, our beliefs, and our values. And that was underpinned by competing truths or alternative facts, all leading to growing divisions that we've seen over a number of years now. Well, COVID-19 then saw business surpass NGOs as the most trusted of institutions, as people sought stability and competence in crisis. Meanwhile, the invasion of Ukraine and other geopolitical flashpoints have fueled brand boycotts, and they've heightened scrutiny on corporate engagement in global affairs as well. And this inflationary and cost of living crisis that immediately then followed has impacted every Australian. We've all felt it. So at every turn, these major events have tested and reshaped this trust equation. And trust is very much a two-sided coin. Where trust exists, problems are more easily solved. Collaboration then becomes the norm. But where trust doesn't exist, negative assumptions are easily made and the benefit of doubt is not given. Therefore, our problems tend to compound over time. So trust in institutions, we argue, is vital if we're going to solve some of our most pressing problems of the day. And it's not blind trust, it's not unconditional trust, but it's trust based on acting with competence and ethics as well within that. So if we begin with our overall trust index, this captures how much people trust the core institutions by asking respondents within our study one simple question, which is how much do you trust this institution to do what is right? So here you can see on the screen the trust index for each country, which is an average of our trust in 4 institutions. So last year's data and this year's data side by side here. And I'll just note where you see blue, know that that's trusted, followed by that kind of neutral or light blue color followed by that light blue or kind of teal color, which is neutral territory, and then distrust, which is red. And I call that out because you'll see some of these colors consistently through this presentation. So it's just good to know that at a simple level. But in Australia, as you can see, that we find ourselves walking a bit of a fine line. And unfortunately, this year we are on the wrong side of that line. We've seen a 3-point decline on 2024, and it's kind of put us into that distrusting territory. So it's not a notable decline, but it does carry us down slightly. And ultimately, what we're seeing is that we're unable at the moment to instill the confidence necessary to be seen as both competent and ethical. And while 2024 was a landmark year, if you remember, over half the world's population went to the polls. Yet in the 13 countries where we tracked election or leadership changes, in the 12 months preceding the research in the market, only 2, which was Argentina and South Africa, saw any significant shifts in trust as a result. And I call that out only as a reminder that trust is not easily rebuilt through the electoral process alone, and particularly in a year for obviously Australia, where we had our own federal election, and now we're trying to move forward as a nation as well. So that's the big picture. And now we'll take a look specifically at what all of this means for health. But a quick note, firstly, on methodology. So our deep dive on health and this particular special report is now into its 4th year. So we've had the Trust Barometer being running for 25 years, And 4 years ago, we really wanted to have a dedicated look at what this means for health. In Australia, we're now into our second year as part of this study, so we do have some year-on-year data now, which is good. But overall, there are 16 countries that we look at within this report. Overall, it's about 1,000 respondents per country, so it is representative across age, gender, region, and ethnicity. We were in the field in March, so it is field work, and it was carried out during a specific period, so that's important to note. And elsewhere across the Asia-Pacific region, where we can draw some comparable stats against our local neighbours, we have 7 markets covered, as you can see there as well. So over the past few years, with all of that research now behind us, we have been tracking a central theme that changes both the delivery of care and the transmission of health information as well. And it's very much this question of influence, as in whose voice makes it into our personal consideration set when making a health-based decision. And it's being shaped on several fronts. First, from 2023, we found that peer voices were now more trusted than experts, right? Showing that expertise is increasingly diffuse in the process as well. Next, we see that health is remarkably and consistently multidimensional, as most people in our sample say that their physical, mental, social, environmental aspects of being healthy, with less than 1% saying it's solely now about my physical health. Right? So that's been a big shift. Then over the study last year, we uncovered an overwhelming amount of empowerment, with 2 in 3 now feeling confident, informed, and in control of their own health. And this is shaping kind of where we turn to, and therefore who we're likely to place our trust in. And we also found that worldviews are shaped by in-person interactions as well, where my doctor is much more likely to shape my view of public health matters than from what I hear from kind of global or national health authorities. So we'll begin, as we often do with these things, with our institutional story and a macro view of trust in health. And unfortunately, most people feel that our kind of most powerful entities in our societies are no longer supporting our health needs, or actually may be getting in the way in some cases, as we'll break down. So first, we've taken a look at how we're all feeling at the moment about our overall health. On average, we've seen a small decline over the 5-year period that we've been tracking this, but a notable 7-point decline in the last 2 years. So in Australia, just 37% of respondents viewed their overall health as very good or better than it was in 2022. And this sits in contrast to the significant growth we've seen in consumer spending as well on health in the last 12 months. So as we've seen from the Commonwealth Bank Home Spending Index or Household Spending Index and the ABS recently as well, we've seen double-digit growth in overall consumer spending, but actually we're not feeling any better about our health. So we're spending more, but to what gain, I think is the question there. And then when it comes to my health in particular, and we think about our trust in institutions, we can see that none are trusted. Business, government, and NGOs are all kind of roughly on par, while media lags behind. And we will touch a little bit more on media because consistently with what we see elsewhere, it faces a number of challenges. While the balance of trust in our institutions, however, regarding my health is consistent with our overall trust scores, as I say, it's our trust in them to address my personal health needs and concerns, which is notably lower. And we've seen these year-on-year improvements within this, though. So there is some positive signs coming through, but overall, our trust in institutions is much lower than our broader trust levels. Now, taking a step back and just looking at overall sectors, and I always think it's good to draw out some positive news amongst all of this. But when we do look at overall trust levels across sectors in Australia, healthcare remains the most consistently trusted sector, which is great. But there is a consistent theme that emerges here as well, and we've seen this over a period of time. The sectors perceived to have the greatest influence and presence within communities that operate at a very local level remain the most trusted. Right? this is where tangible gains are most often realised, where we can show a greater kind of presence and a commitment to the local needs of society. Now, we could also look at some subsectors as well within the healthcare sector. But we don't have, what I would call out is we don't have this data specifically for Australia. We do have it as a global average though. So we can be fairly confident and draw some parallels and conclusions, particularly from markets like Canada and the UK. But much of this is also reflective of what we see in our overall trust barometer. And while we might not be trusting of institutions writ large, we do see trust again as increasingly local. So when it comes to consumer health, we're seeing a growing trend towards greater awareness, and we've touched on improving self-determination and health literacy amongst communities. So it's driving a lot of kind of trust, is that kind of confidence as well. And particularly that was prevalent post-COVID, where we had strong representative voices across the healthcare sector working in partnership that was prevalent almost in everyday life. So that kind of awareness and focus on our health has continued, and obviously we hope that continues to do so. But one common theme coming from this year's Trust Barometer, the more macro study, was that of grievance. And so I will touch on that quickly. But 62% of Australians we found in that particular report hold either a moderate or high sense of grievance right now. And it's leading to beliefs and views that really do run counter to what we would perceive as our our norms and our values here in Australia. One of those is a belief that, or a perception that actually the only path to change right now is hostile activism. And that includes violence against people, against property. Right. So it's very, very charged right now that we're seeing. And it also leads to a decrease in our overall optimism. And this idea of a zero-sum mindset comes to the fore with grievance. And it's fueled by this belief that governments and business serve only a select few, that their actions hurt me, and the system favours the rich. So to say 62% of Australia either moderately or highly aggrieved right now are in agreement with some of those sentiments. And so we see this in healthcare as well, this sense of grievance coming through now, with only 1 in 2 of us believing believing that the actions of institutions hurt my ability to get quality healthcare, with the majority of people in 9 of the 16 countries that we studied for this report also in agreement with this as well. So where is all this distrust stemming from? Well, unfortunately, it starts from the fact that the majority of Australians worry that our leaders purposely mislead us on matters of health. We're approaching leadership with skepticism. So voices of authority generate reach, which is great. Partnering with government and with ministers really helps convey key messages at important times, particularly relating to health. But while they're cutting through, I think the question therefore comes is, are they actually trusted? And so we probably do have to think a bit more critically about the voices we use and how we tell those stories and bring key facts to life, particularly through partnership with technical experts, scientists, educators, local community, the people really impacted. That needs to come through probably a lot more than we see at the moment. And as highlighted, and I said we'd come back and touch on media in a bit more detail, but our media does continue to be challenged in more ways than one. So if we look at our media under the lens of accuracy of reporting, we have seen a bit of a collapse in recent years. Australia is not immune as well, with just 1/3 of respondents trusting of the media when it comes to reporting information about healthcare across key areas such as disease treatments and prevention as well. And this is across the board when it comes to age, gender, income, and politics as well. So we need to find ways in which we can be part of the solution that resonates much more clearly with the communities we serve and support our media in doing so as well. So on that note, that's I guess the macro view. But I now would like to hand over to Caroline and to take us through the youth health ecosystem. But just before I do, so I have to touch on this slide. We have seen notable declines in our trust in media reporting accurate healthcare information. And we're also kind of placing greater emphasis on actually where we go to now. And there is a bit of confusion overall, with respondents of the study seem to be saying that while there is, I don't know where to turn, there is confusion. I feel clear. I feel like I know where to turn, and I can tell and understand if medical advice is good or bad. That's what we need to address now, is instilling that greater kind of confidence and trust in the reporting. Okay. So building confidence in the sources of information is critical. Finding voices within local communities is vital, and ensuring that message resonates with the daily realities of the Australian public will help bring us back to a point of trust, I think, across our institutions. But we are now, as I say, going to look at the youth in particular and understand what's playing out there. So thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Tom. So this leads us to a specific focus on youth and some interesting dynamics that are at play. The youth health ecosystem is evolving, and it matters now more than ever. So people aged 18 to 34 make up almost a quarter of Australia's population. And it's in these years that many health risks first emerge. And the choices young people make today will not only shape their own future, but also the well-being of their communities and society as a whole. So young people see health knowledge as accessible to everyone, not just doctors or experts, with 30% of Australians now believing that someone who has done their own research can be just as knowledgeable as a doctor. And there's been a sharp rise in this belief over the past year. Among 18 to 34-year-olds, that jumps to 43%, making them 3 times more likely to believe this than our older generations. Among young people, we're seeing a rise in the use of social channels and independent media for health information. So what this means is that young Australians are moving away from what is considered our traditional sources, and instead they're getting their health information from social platforms or podcasts or newsletters. And this means that their trust and attention is shifting to where content feels more accessible, but also more relatable to them. Young Australians aren't just consuming health information, they're also sharing it more than any other group. This is perhaps not a surprise to many, that people aged 18 to 34 are significantly more likely to post health news, to share their own health experiences, and also express their own personal opinions online. These figures have seen a significant increase across the board over the last year. So a quarter of all Australians say people with a formal medical degree have a big influence over their health decisions. But this influence is even stronger amongst young people. So 37% of those aged 18 to 34 report that being guided by uncredentialed voices, so are nearly 2.5 times more than those aged 55. So this just highlights just how much relatability and lived experiences are driving decision-making amongst the younger generation. Perhaps a fairly alarming finding is that most young people have made health decisions, that they regret, and this is due to misinformation. So over 1/3 of all Australians and more than half of our young people say they regretted a health decision made due to misinformation. And that incorrect information has mostly come from their doctor, user-generated content, or independent creators, or even their peers, such as their family and friends. This next section talks about health influence decentralised. So health influence today is no longer centralised in a few trusted sources. It's now spread across many voices, many channels and platforms. For young Australians in particular, decisions about healthcare are shaped by this decentralisation. And that means our strategies must also be multifaceted, ensuring we engage across multiple touchpoints and speak to stakeholders in ways that reflect this new reality. So when it comes to health, trust is deeply local. Australians place the greatest confidence in their own doctors at a whopping 84%, but also in their friends and family. But trust drops sharply for leaders and institutions. So only about half of us trust health NGOs or a CEO, and further still trust government leaders, healthcare executives or journalists even less. So the message is clear. Health trust is personal and not institutional. When we ask people how they decide if they're healthy, most looked beyond traditional medical definitions. Because of this, 59% felt their healthcare provider wasn't fully equipped to actually address all of their needs. So in these cases, people often turn elsewhere for advice. So from trusted sources like healthcare companies or NGO websites, but also much more informal ones like family and friends, online searches, and even social media. The concern here is that people are far more likely to rely on formal information and non-expert sources than on qualified voices in a formal health system. And once outside that system, they're more exposed to misinformation, personal opinions, and ideologies instead of actual science-based information. So when Australians think about what makes someone a legitimate health expert, formal training still does matter, with 78% saying it's important. But credentials aren't just measured on legitimacy. Nearly 7 out of 10 also value personal experience. So someone's personal experience with health issues. And 2/3 say that past benefits from someone's advice are just as important. This shows that expertise today is a mix of academic knowledge, but also lived experience and proven impact. So how can institutions and providers regain the influence on health decisions? Well, fundamentally, this comes down to the effective communications and how you engage with your stakeholders. Make it relevant. Highlight your understanding of people. To be seen as a legitimate health expert, understanding people's needs and wants is completely essential. 72% of Australians say this matters. And they view this consistent, and this is viewed as consistent across all age groups. People expect experts to show that they truly understand people's lives, but also their challenges. Make it frequent. With more frequent communication, health information becomes much more believable. So data shows that health authorities are viewed as far more credible than social media or podcasts because they which typically require repeated exposure in order to gain that trust. So while global health authorities may not be able to reach audiences consistently or constantly, even connecting once a week would have a better impact over time. Be empathetic and be accessible. So Australians who follow uncredentialed voices say that it gets something that they often miss from traditional providers, and that's empathy, lived experiences, and also a judgment-free space. They also value compelling communication and a whole person approach to health, and it's something that conventional providers could definitely learn from. And lastly, be relatable. For young Australians, relatability is the key to trust. More than half of our young people aged 18 to 34 say that they trust people online who share their similar health conditions. And half also trust individual content creators with medical training, compared to just 1 in 5 of those who are aged 55 and older. This shows that we connect with youth. This shows that to connect with the youth, health messages need to come from voices that are both relatable and also authentic. I'll pass back to Tom, who can summarise all of that for you.
Thanks, Caroline. So, yeah, those, I think, some important takeaways there, obviously, from the research. First, we need to engage in this newly emerged kind of youth health ecosystem. It is notably different from what's come before it. We need to take it seriously, we need to speak up, and we need to also speak more through that process of engagement as well. We also need to leverage both institutional and personal influence. It doesn't go in one direction, and traditional powers don't hold a monopoly over how people make their health decisions as well. We also need to remain consistent in what we say, while considering where, when, and how we say it, aligned very much to the actions that we take. And I think it's in the actions that we take, we have to probably pay a lot more attention to. Those two things, what we say and what we do, have to be very, very closely aligned. We're under the microscope like never before. And this sense of grievance and division coming through in our societies puts further pressure on that as well. And finally, take the time to understand the needs of all of our stakeholder universe at a local level. Demonstrate our understanding through those factors that Caroline spoke to around relevance, empathy, and reliability as well. All right. So that actually brings us to the end of this presentation. Now, the full reports, both the Edelman Trust Barometer and this special report on health, are all available online on the website as well. For anyone who is really interested in their health data and some comparable data as well, given it's our 25th year of studying trust now, Edelman globally has created quite a fancy interactive dashboard that's available on the website as well, where you can go back over those 25 years and compare across demographics, age, gender, compare across markets, and look at how trust has changed and shifted accordingly as well. I'm English, so it's not a very positive reading for us either. Although I've been here 14 years now, it's we are tracking very much ahead of the UK, which is great. But yeah, all of this is available, and I think without further ado, if there's any questions or any further detail we can go into.
There's some questions in there.
Yeah. Tom, and Caroline, first of all, thanks very much for that really interesting stuff there. So first question we've got is, it's clear we need to build trust and establish credible sources of information in healthcare, but how do we deal with sources that are unreliable and maybe even deliberately unreliable or dangerous? And I guess we've got the example of last week, paracetamol and autism. So maybe you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes down to our kind of level of partnership and our willingness to invest in long-term partnerships as well, and credible voices. I mean, the connections drawn and the stories from last week, obviously disappointing. I think to hear from many, and what's happening in the US, I think it's just another instance, something else that's reflective of that. But we have to. I think it's important that we do continue to rely on facts, on studies, on scientific expertise, and put those voices kind of front and center with more legitimacy in kind of in platforms. I think coming through, I mean, we touched on the youth voice and kind of the youth health ecosystem. That's really challenging, I think, for media globally right now, including here in Australia, is how we're cutting through and how we're resonating with audiences that are not necessarily kind of paying attention to those traditional formats. Mm-hmm. So we do have to consider a much more broader kind of agnostic view of what we perceive as kind of health influence in a way that we haven't before. It's no longer just 4 or 5 kind of titles that can kind of help sway that. But the rise of kind of creators and partnerships in that need to be considered. I think it's a really tight, it's a difficult path to kind of follow and to balance on. I think is kind of ensuring that facts are put first, front and center, but they're believed in as well. But it has to come through via kind of both the actions that we take and the partners in which we look to help tell those stories, and it has to be in partnership. I think government and business. We saw in our 23 data, or there was a big expectation. The 23 report in particular looked at kind of the divisions and polarizations happening in society. A big finding and I think revealed that was an expectation around business and government doing more together. You're not being seen to try and kind of take the lead or act in isolation of one another, but demonstrate real partnership. And we saw that through COVID. I think this is the best demonstration of this was during COVID. Every morning, 11 a.m., we had the chief medical and health officers alongside the premiers conveying the facts, and that consistency, that presence, became part of our daily routines as well, and something that I think we all turned to, and we trusted as a community because we were leading in it together. I think that's the perfect demonstration of that partnership in play that instilled confidence in the science that is otherwise missing from some of the statements from last week.
And I think, yeah, exactly. And I think that word about partnership and collaboration, and we saw that really in action last week in Australia and around the world, and even in the US, again, about paracetamol and autism, because as you can imagine, there were lots of phone calls with the world. But you saw it in Australia as well, that all the peak bodies and government all around the world were all singing from the same hymn sheet, and we're all saying the same thing against what came out of two specific people over there. And I think it really credible voices all saying the same thing, and it helped, or it worked anyway. It seemed to, yeah.
Let's hope that sustains.
Yes. Well, okay. Another question is interesting to see people think they can find good health information. To what extent do you think access to AI tools is giving people the confidence, rightly or wrongly, that they can access good health info?
That's a multifaceted Q&A particular. So I think, look, there's no doubt that AI will obviously, hopefully, well, it will change certainly the way in which we all kind of communicate, the sources we use, etc. I think that there should be kind of hope, and I think that it's early stages yet, particularly in the modelling of these of many of these large language models. Much of it right now is based on earned media. It's based on news. There's a lot that comes obviously from platforms like Reddit as well, and that can kind of help shape the beliefs and ideas rightly or wrongly one way. I think as long as we can instill confidence and accessibility in these tools across our media ecosystem, they can be a kind of net positive because they can draw from trusted and verifiable sources. I think there is a danger naturally there. It's probably not my place to comment. I'm probably not the most qualified person to comment on what the kind of future of these AI models looks like, but no doubt there will be some improved incentives applied to commercialize and monetize these platforms. And I think that's also where there is a danger presented, and where greater regulation or oversight certainly might be needed. There would be a role, no doubt, for the TGA in terms of kind of how they're enforcing the dissemination of medical information when it is then commercialized through potentially an advertising model within something like a ChatGPT. Now we're not there yet, but that would be the concern that comes through. But hopefully, I guess it comes down to that democratization, accessibility of information that should be a force for good.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. Got lots of questions. That's good. It's interesting that self-assessment of health is down in most of the markets. Do you have any insights into why this is occurring? Also, given the unreliability of self-assessment as a tool, is there any way to validate these results, as in through correlation of sales of medicines or healthcare visits?
I think
another multifaceted question.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with that. I think that it's very valid, right, in terms of that kind of self-determination of whether I believe I'm healthier or not. I think there's multiple things happening there as well. Is it a reality? It's hard to say, and we can't validate that. This is just I guess claimed perceptions at this point in time that we can draw from. But it continues to grow, and I think what we see from that is this balance between there's multidimensional health as a starting point. It's not necessarily about physical health, but it is a balance between kind of my overall well-being, right? And I think it's fair to say that despite the lockdowns and everything that was enforced upon everyone during COVID and the social isolations, and it's not taking away from, I think, the issues that were at play there, particularly for older communities. But by and large, we did feel like we had this kind of sense of time and balance in life. We were spending much more time outdoors, and that now plays to a part whereby we've had an economic and cost of living crisis that's been forced upon us, and as economic anxieties increase, so does our perception of our overall kind of well-being, and there is a balance there as well. So I think there's a number of things at play. We do know that as economic optimism decreases, our overall trust levels will decrease. So as economic optimism rises, trust increases, and you would assume our overall well-being would improve and increase as well. But I do think it's well worth kind of further investigation. I'm sure those on the call as well have their own first-party data or access to different data sets that might give more context or greater depth to that particular finding. I think it's hard to say.
Okay, thanks. So next one. Many of us on the call are interested in the concept of self-care for health, or as well, self-care is healthcare. That's another tagline we often use, which means, of course, empowering people to take actions to ensure good health, and they're active self-managers of their health. You mentioned 2 out of 3 people say they feel confident. Is 66% the actual figure? You also mentioned this is driven by increased health literacy. Do you have a figure for the increase in health literacy?
Not within this report. No, we don't have that improvement in health literacy, but we have found that in other third-party reports, certainly. I think it has mirrored over a number of years that kind of rise in overall kind of self-confidence and ability to determine kind of what's right for me personally. Is that right? No, I mean we're also seeing increases in, as Caroline called out, we're seeing increases in people regretting decisions that they've made in relation to that health. So I think there are trade-offs. I mean, it would be a particular concern amongst younger generations and younger age groups, where kind of the prevalence of and access to disinformation and misinformation is much more heightened because of social media. But we don't have that kind of clear statistic in this particular report.
Yeah, okay, and I think that's a whole new webinar,
Yes.
enhancing health literacy. So another question. What do you think makes someone appear authentic? With a background of such distrust, I'm constantly surprised by the willingness to trust authentic voices and who people think are being more authentic, no matter how radical the statements. Is it about feeling like we can relate to the authentic voices, the view of the world, and fight against the machine?
Yeah, when we look at trust, so I'll come back to authenticity as well. But when we do look at trust, it breaks down into perceived competence and ethics. The efficacy of someone or an institution more broadly that we look at is, do I trust this person to do the right thing? Right? But again, it comes down to what you personally believe is the right thing. And then the competence grade is a question around, do I believe they can actually do good? Like, are they creating kind of impact and outcomes for me as well? So between those two things, that's how we kind of view trust as competence and ethics, our ability to get things done and to do what's right. I think within that, though, there are certain kind of self-perceived ideas and notions. So do I relate? Does this person kind of resonate? Have they got a lived experience which I feel kind of is shared with that I've had? Do their actions mirror what they say? That would be another one. And again, I think it really comes down to your particular kind of values, your beliefs, your own lived experiences as to how likely you are to trust, to lean into someone, to someone's authenticity. But it's competence, it would be ethics, and that kind of relatability, as you say, kind of comes through. But it is quite a personal thing. When we look at these, when we study trust more broadly, so we do also get engaged to carry out trust measurement and management on behalf of our clients. And there are further further variables that we do look at. One of them is self, and that kind of that mirror and reflection of me, and then the other one is kind of values, and am I willing to kind of lean into the values and purpose that they present themselves with, and then finally you get into more functional and competency grades and scores as well, around. Is the product or the service or kind of whatever they're selling, do I believe in that enough? Is it going to kind of deliver a benefit, a functional benefit for me? So that's how these things start to play out.
Yeah. Okay. And just one final question from me, talking about media and trust, and which is probably at an all-time low. So how do we work against comments, especially politicians, when someone says anything they don't like, no matter who it is, no matter how authentic that person might be, they just say, well, that's fake news, that's not true. And people in the public believe it. So, and it seems to be used not just by certain people now, it's around the world now, it's coming in. Oh, that's fake news because, well, I don't like that statement, or I don't like what that person's saying. So is there anything we can do about that? Because it's really difficult to combat.
Yeah, this is another multifaceted one, and one that I'm quite passionate about as well. So, I mean, firstly, I think within the media organisations that we have, not just here in Australia but globally as well, further investment and action needs to be taken into demonstrating kind of and verifying both the independence and the authority of the information being shared. I think the BBC, ABC, the BBC does a great piece on this around Verify. ABC has something similar. We're seeing organisations like the New York Times invest into their kind of fact-checking and verification processes as well. That's now starting to come to the kind of fore. It instills kind of a greater belief and faith in what you're reading as a result. We've seen that from these media organisations as well. There needs to be a commercial incentive more often than not for it to do that. I mean, the BBC and the ABC obviously both being kind of public broadcasters, so they need to be funded appropriately. In the private sector, I think the question around whether or not we're trying to serve the interests of the public, or are we trying to incentivize the interests of shareholders? I think that's a balance that I think continues to be a real challenge right now. I mean, in Australia, we have the second most concentrated media market in the world. We have two news organisations that dominate in excess of about 90% of kind of metro share in Nine and News. And that consolidation and concentration of power is also having an effect on the ability to believe in what's being said. I think there has been some improvements this year in the World Press Freedom Index and where we stand, but certainly last year we sat at 38th on the list in terms of how we graded in World Press Freedom Index. So Australia was sitting behind, I think, the Dominican Republic and Niger There's just two examples, and that's not a critique of them, but I think we should hold Australia to a higher standard than 38th on a global index. And the biggest issue there in terms of Reporters Without Borders that monitor that was overall political influence on our media ecosystem. And so we need to invest and we need to support a more diversified media ecosystem with greater independent voices at play as well, who can invest appropriately in the fact-checking and verification measures that we're seeing from obviously larger news organisations. And I think that will continue to help instill. I think the positive right now for Australia is that we are seeing a growth. There is an uptick in independent media voices. And there is the opportunity now for those within the media, for journalists, for editors, I think, to go about establishing new models with new tools that are available to them, which I think is a fantastic thing for us to be seeing happening, and hopefully that continues and the success behind it as well.
Okay. And we do have another late question, or another question, final question, I think. We talk about lived experience being important, but these people are not necessarily health trained. How do we balance the two, or lived experience and a voice from a healthcare professional as well?
Right, I was going to say if no,
That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those. I think it's hard to tell. So it's hard, I think, to make a clear determination on how you kind of balance. I think it comes down to how well we resonate. How well the information that we're looking to share and disseminate, how well that resonates across audiences. And we are not a homogenous society. We're more diverse than ever before, and I think that diversity within our communities, we have to do a better job of recognizing that within the world of media, marketing, communications, from which obviously we operate. I think that representation is clear. The need for greater representation it is clear in terms of how we tell stories and how we convey messages of public importance as well. I think you can't just automatically assume that you can demonstrate how someone's lived experience draws kind of parallels with your own, or whether you can demonstrate empathy in some way. I think you really have to act on that and show it through, again, the partnerships and the voices that you look to use.
So do you think when we're like our community out talking about managing chronic disease or something like that, that having the HCP voice and the lived experience voice works well? It helps to build authenticity, if you like, trust.
Yeah, certainly. I think, it continues to be a kind of prominent theme and outcome and finding within not just this report, but also over the last couple of years of various sector reports and also the Trust Barometer. I think having kind of the technical experts, the scientists, the professionals with their kind of academic backgrounds, and qualifications, alongside other voices, I think we can see is a good mix. It's a good recipe, so to speak, to kind of build that trust within the message as well. So having those people, I think the challenge that we often find, particularly with scientists or the academic community, is their ability to convey facts quite clearly. Right, that's another finding that comes through. A couple of years ago, our report focused on the role of kind of innovation impacting various sectors, including healthcare. And the key finding from that is, yes, we want to hear from the technical experts and the scientists, but they're not very good at conveying that in a clear way, which I can easily understand and I can easily take away and act on. Right, so there has to be that balance of voice in there as well.
Okay. Well, look, I think we've had a really interesting and fruitful discussion, which has been great. And just to remind everyone, the recording will be available after this session. And I hope you all join with me in thanking Tom and Caroline for a great session. And I would like to remind everyone that registration is now open for our 2025 Gala Night and Self-Care Excellence Awards, November 13 here in Sydney. It'll be a great night. We've got Helen Daly, MC, and Dr. Nick Coatsworth as a guest speaker, plus entertainment. So I hope you will all join us. Have a look online. And thanks again, Caroline and Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Judy.
Thanks again.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Bye.